right, and we should be live. Welcome to episode 2 of the Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast. I am your host, Jen Hebink. Thank you so much for joining us today. I teach adapted PE full-time in a city that's a rural city about 40 minutes outside of Minneapolis, and I just love what we do, and I think we are better connected together, and so that's why I started this podcast. And for today, for my listeners, what I want to share with you is that we have a guest from Minnesota who I'll introduce in a little bit, but we call adapted PE DAPE in Minnesota, and so it is short for Developmental Adapted Physical Education. And in Minnesota, that's how we talk adapted PE. So we are going to be using DAPE a lot in this podcast, especially with my guest. So just wanted to give you a quick heads up on that, and you'll see that in my little headshot there. So what I want to share with you is our mission is to inspire, connect, and amplify adapted PE teacher voices for those who support all students. And so I want to jump in here and come next to, well, that's too small. Let me shift that a little bit. There we go. Now you can see me. But we have this vision for this podcast that we want to celebrate the heart and the beat of being adapted PE teachers and supporting all students. The heart, when we talk about the heart, it's sitting around a big comfy couch, or in Minnesota at MinDape at the bonfire and just sharing stories about what it's like to be a teacher, teaching adapted PE or DAPE in Minnesota. And we also want to talk about the beat behind our lives, the daily rhythm. And so this is our essential field. And so when you put that together, you get the heartbeat. And I just think that's so important that you guys hear the vision and the mission behind this adapted PE podcast. And so we're here to connect and inspire and amplify, and we're ready to share our heart with you all, the heart and the beat. So going forward, I want to share that this is a not-for-profit podcast that will be released one time per month. And that gives me as a teacher a little bit of flexibility to kind of do a little research, but also kind of set my own schedule. And I need to give a giant shout out to Pam at Fit and Fun Playscapes. The cool thing about Fit and Fun is that their just ideas and mission behind their company to help all learners move and all abilities moves just lines up so well with our mission as adapted PE teachers and those who support all students that we're excited to just have this sponsorship and partnership with Fit and Fun Playscapes. Thanks to them, they will be bringing you this podcast, and we'll be partnering together for this 2025-2026 podcast year. And so thank you so much to Fit and Fun, and I hope that you all are able to go ahead and check out Fit and Fun, and they're on X at Fit and Fun Play is their handle. And then in order to follow us, Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast on social media, we have on X at Heartbeats of Adapted PE, and then same thing on Blue Sky, Heartbeats of Adapted PE at bsky.social. And then you can always just send us a Gmail at Heartbeats of Adapted PE, all spelled out except for the PE part, at gmail.com. And so exciting news. We dropped our first episode on Apple Podcasts and Spotify this last week. So you can find our first episode there. We talked to Justin and Jeff and Katie at Shape Baltimore, where we premiered, and having the Teachers of the Year from 2024 was such a cool experience, just to like listen to their stories, listen to their background, and like what they were so excited to present and how it went at Shape Baltimore. And there's so many little tidbits that I would love for you all to check out. So be sure to check out Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast on Spotify and on Apple Podcast. We would love to have you listen there as well. You can also interact with us live, and that is on our YouTube page at Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast. please join us there. You can make some comments and things like that and interact with the show. So the next thing I want to do is I want to share how amazing the HPE Collective has been. We've been working with Jordan Manley to partner in bringing this podcast over to the HPE Collective. What it is just a group of amazing health and physical education teachers that love interacting with each other on social media, but just don't like that noise of all the different things that don't have to do with physical education and health. And so this is a registered and RSVP event where you can just interact with other people, like-minded people, and continue the conversation beyond just this time. And so moving forward, I promised you, listeners, that I would bring you high-quality guests who understand our profession and understand how to support students and would help us become better teachers and supporters of those students. And so in doing that, I do need to shout out to Shape America. This is also on their YouTube page. So be sure if you're following or if you're not subscribed to Shape America's YouTube page, be sure to shout out to them too. And that is how we're hitting so many different areas. So we have a couple of different YouTube pages. So again, the YouTube pages are the Heartbeats of Adapted PE. And then we have the Shape America YouTube, and we have the HPE Collective. So again, I promised you high quality guests, and now we're going to bring him on. This is Rich Burke. He's one of my mentors and amazing people and MINDAPE committee members. He is a longtime adapted PE teacher, and he will share how long in a moment. He's retired, and he's also the statewide DAPE specialist, again, for those of you just joining, Developmental Adapted Physical Education in Minnesota. And so he's one of the teachers, Rich, that always makes me better every time I talk to him, and has just left such a legacy in Minnesota. And I'm just really glad I get to talk to you all the time. I don't know what I would do. So, Rich, welcome to the show. Can you share a little bit about your background and how long you've been teaching and all that stuff? I'm going to split the screen here, and now we can talk like this. Look at that. Go ahead.
Sure. My first teaching job was in 1979 in a small school district just outside of Minot, North Dakota. And it became very evident to me in my first 2 or 3 years that I wanted to work with students with disabilities. And so that meant for me not really having those opportunities in North Dakota as I came to the Twin Cities and did my master's degree at the University of Minnesota, and had the great honor and privilege of being with, I think, one of the great mentors in adapted PE, Dr. Alan Burton, at the university. At the time, there wasn't a lot of age difference between Alan and I, and we ended up joining the state leadership committee, MINDAPE, about the same time. I think maybe I was just a little bit ahead of Dr. Burton, but we would often ride to meetings together and talk about just all kinds of topics and how being better teachers would impact the lives of our students and their families. And that's always been priority one. So I've been lucky to have so many great mentors in my life, that so many people that have made impact. And you and I have talked about this a lot, Jen. It's about sometimes, when you maybe get a little too much full of yourself, and it really isn't about that. It's about having connections with folks that help fill up your tank. And because that way you're better able to do your job, and that you are going to be able to do the same for others. And that's really what it's all about, is sharing those great experiences with others in our, what better profession can you be part of than adapted PE? You get the chance to work with students who honestly appreciate you and need you. Sometimes it's a little tough to justify their behaviors, but you know what? It's life. And so I think my first MINDAPE conference was when I was at the university going to grad school. I was in 1984.
Woo.
And so and we'll talk about this later, but as we approach the 50th annual this year, I've been a part of that for a long time. I joined the committee shortly after that, 1988, I think it was. I was asked to join as a member, at-large member, and then at my teaching career in Mounds View that was over 30 years in adapted PE. I think it's almost been 20 years now that I've been the statewide DAPE specialist in Minnesota. So that's been another just huge honor. And I guess the last thing and I think you'll chat about that too, is in 2004 in New Orleans, I was honored as the national. Back then it was AFERD, and the structure looked a little different, but the benefits are still the same. And you followed up then in 2022, so I was so excited. And in fact, when you were down there, I couldn't attend, but I did have a live stream going on of my own and got to watch that, and it just, my heart was bursting that day. So it was pretty cool.
Proud Papa.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that sometimes, right? At our spring meeting last weekend, I don't remember who it was, but somebody mentioned that. I think it's pretty true, is I'm coming to the time in my career where I'm finally aging out.
Yeah.
So,
that's all right.
It is all right. It's been a wonderful life, and I just can't imagine myself having any other career than an adaptive.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about New Orleans, because both of us kind of received our awards for National Teacher of the Year in New Orleans. And I know for me, there are so many memorable moments. What are some memorable moments from your 2004 experience as Teacher of the Year?
You got to remember, in my life, I grew up in Minot, North Dakota. And yes, Minot was my graduating class at Minot High School was 750 students. It was a big graduating class. There were, but the whole town was only 30,000 people at the time. And so when I just made the decision to come to Minneapolis to go to the University of Minnesota for my master's and then beyond, there were more people at the University of Minnesota than were in Minot, North Dakota. So that, I always have to remember that in the Minnesota university system, there are 40-some thousand people, and so that was bigger than the town I came to. So my first days at the university were awestruck. I mean, I was like, holy cow, okay, this is it. And my wife was still back in Minot teaching, and so it was pretty awesome, to say the least. So
awesome.
But New Orleans was a great experience. I still am in touch with a few of the people who were toys in other areas, the elementary toy, and some of the other folks that were in that toy class were great folks, and I was always happy to be connected with them. On a personal note, when my family came down and joined me, our family highlight was getting to go to one of Emerald's restaurants when we were down there.
Okay. Yeah, they have such good food. And I think a really big difference between like we just went to Baltimore where you could just walk everywhere and get Chipotle, right? Whereas in New Orleans, you have to walk everywhere and sit down and eat. That is the tradition down there. That is the culture. But they have such good restaurants down there.
And riding the what was it called? What street was it anyway? The train down Bourbon Street, and it was just a really great experience.
You said something about your suitcase not arriving. Can you share more about that? Did it have clothes or was it equipment?
It was a little of both. But
Okay.
when I realized that I had checked into, I'm not a big, never have been a big conference hotel. I've always tried to find a place that's close to the convention center, but kind of be able to kind of have my own space too. And that time when I got to the airport, when I arrived and was ready to start doing my thing, and no suitcase, and it didn't come for 2.5 days. So I literally wore the slacks and polo shirt and a sweater for 2 days. So I was, that was part of the deal. So,
I bet you were excited to see your suitcase.
Yeah.
When it got there.
It came about the same time as my family did. So that was pretty cool.
My husband, I will always remember this because he got off the airplane and then like tried to speed as fast as he could to the convention center because it was like the night that we were doing awards, and it was literally like 45 minutes. He walked in and sat down, and 45 minutes later they were announcing. And so if he had like any delays,
right,
it would have not turned out well. But I was so glad. My mom was there. My mom went to college at St. Cloud State and was going to do adapted PE. But she did her student teaching, was like, this is not for me. And like, good for her for like not knowing. But I feel like she was kind of living through me for a little bit. She's like, this could have been me, So it was fun to have her there, and she just kind of enjoyed the city too. So yeah, it was always nice to have family there.
I've had the great pleasure to meet your parent, both of your parents, and your family, Jen, and they certainly, I can see where you get your love for teaching and adapted PE from them. So,
well, thank you. All right, so here is the meat of the podcast. We're going to ask Rich about some of the myths that kind of float around in our profession. And we're going to have some good conversations, I think, about kind of the realities and how to kind of advocate, I think, sometimes for some of the needs that come up. So, Rich, our first kind of myth I want to talk about is sometimes adapted PE teachers are on their own islands. What would you say to someone who feels kind of alone?
I am very sensitive to that because we have a number of adapted PE teachers who, number one, in Minnesota, they come from very rural areas in Minnesota. Even folks who are in a bigger populated area, metro, they certainly are probably the only adapted PE teacher in their building a lot of times, and sometimes in several buildings if they're full-time adapted PE teachers. And I think it would be easy for them to kind of get discouraged because there isn't a lot of chances to collaborate with other adapted PE people. And I think that's been the job of MnDAPE and the Minnesota DAPE Leadership Committee to really make people feel that, hey, we're all in this together, and we try to do everything we can as far as our state conference and DAPE in your backyard and our Facebook users group and the emails that we send out, so that people that doesn't happen. We want you to be part of the bigger community. We want you to have the opportunity to ask questions, and we try to give folks as many opportunities for that. In this day and age, that's one of the really big differences between now and when I started teaching. Is it's much easier to communicate with people. You don't have to be face to face to share some experiences or ask questions or what worked for you. And oh man, I'm excited. Can you tell me more about that? And I truly get excited when I hear people putting all the communication to good use and to come up with ideas on their own. And the one thing in Minnesota, and I think in the entire country as far as adapted PE, people are so willing to share. I just have never run into folks that weren't, yes, they were trying to make a name for themselves, but that was probably because of the way, sometimes professors have to, document things. And
Yep.
but I've never felt like kind of a backseat driver. It's always been, we're all in this together, and let's just keep pushing it forward. So
yeah, I agree with you. With being Teachers of the Year and everything, I was able to travel to NAPEC, which is the National Adapted PE Conference, and I felt like I was sitting with Minnesota people instead of being at camp, which we'll talk about for our conference. It was at a hotel with a pool, but we were all like, it's the same like sharing of wisdom and just caring about our profession and our students. And I just think like the more that we can connect together, which is what this podcast is trying to do, the more that we become better teachers and not islands on our own.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
And I think that the second thing with that is that we all need to remember that our lives, no matter where you think you're at professionally, we are the result of all the efforts that came before us.
Oh, yeah.
We're building on this, we're on this plateau wherever, if it's good, bad, or indifferent in your mind, as we're, so that island that we might be on, there's a lot of people that have pushed us up to get to that point. So don't ever feel like you're the only person. There's lots of us out there. So
yeah. So moving on from the feeling like an island, what do you feel when people who don't know DAPE and who we are and what we do say adapted PE is a related service? Does that make your blood boil? Like,
yeah,
what do we do?
It's been the same comments for forever. I mean, literally in Minnesota, we have had this state criteria for DAPE qualification for students. Has not changed since the early 80s. And when it did change, it was just because some of the other categorical disability language changed so but how we qualify students in Minnesota for DAPE service and whether we can serve them or not has been the same. And I think sometimes when economy or whatever is driving districts to make these decisions, instead of using data-driven decision making, I think sometimes crunch time is that they want to say certain things that aren't true. And that's one thing that, in federal rule, adapted PE is the only direct service that's specifically mentioned in federal rule. So, and that's been there since 1976. So that's, we're part of the group. And in Minnesota, we have one of the departments in special ed at Minnesota Department of Ed is the Division of Assistance and Compliance here in Minnesota. And they put out occasionally statements or letters to the field, and so it's kind of like Q&As is how they deal with questions from the field, and they've always answered this. But as recently as 2022, they answered it again. And what are related services? Related services are defined as transportation and such developmental, corrective, or other support services as required to assist a child with a disability to benefit from special education. And then the second one goes on, related services include speech language pathology, audiology service, interpretive services, psychological, physical, and occupational therapy, which sometimes that's where we get lumped into, but it doesn't say DAPE, it says physical and occupational therapy, recreation, including therapeutic rec, early identification and assessment of disabilities in children, counseling services, mobility orientation, medical services. So the whole list of things that it lists specifically what are related service. And we've never been included in a statement like that. So, and the thing that really in Minnesota sets us apart is that all of these related service don't have state mandated criteria. In Minnesota, we have 3525.1352, which sometimes pops into my head in the middle of the night after all these years. But that's the one that says it is a state mandated service, and if a student qualifies under our criteria, they must receive DAPE or adapted PE services. So
Yes. So when someone says adapted PE is a related service, you can advocate and educate.
yeah,
Right. We always say that
it.
advocacy is education. And also when we know better, we do better. And so for our admin who maybe don't know, like I've had to maybe speak up a little bit about that too. And so now we're all clear and it works really well. So
And we always keep those clarifications on our mndape.org website for
yes,
resources for people, because sometimes, especially when you're an early service or newer adapted P teacher, or sometimes it's maybe a very small part of your job, you don't have resources to keep you up to date on things. So that's one thing that I think we've done very good in Minnesota, is keeping all those resources readily available for all of our adapted PE service, as well as administrative. Anybody can access.
anybody can access.
That.
It's wonderful.
Parents, you bet.
Yep, anybody can access. And so when we adapted PE teachers are writing goals, again, we're the ones writing the goals for those gross motor skills and any kind of needs that come up. We have this thing that I highlighted on here. DAPE is a SPED service, which is what you were talking about. Can you talk like little tiny bit more about how that kind of gets mixed up? What is the myth that people believe about DAPE not being a SPED service?
Well, it really goes back to a related service relates to a special education service. So we have the criteria in the whole idea of due process. We have a lot of discussions amongst the DAPE Leadership Committee, and due process is exactly what it says. It's the process that's due to a student to make sure that you are documenting all of the steps critical to best serve, so that their services are least restrictive and they're free and appropriate. So, we talk about it. It all starts in Minnesota with our criteria, but it could be in any state. Even if you don't have state mandated criteria, you have to start with an evaluation, or actually you start with a referral where somebody on your team or in your buildings thinks that a student probably has needs that need to be covered in adapted PE. And so when you start with those evaluations in Minnesota, we really have three types now. We have initial, we have a 3-year, which is mandated here in Minnesota. Sometimes in other states, it's a different timeline. But as of last year, we, from the legislature, we have a directive now that we can do standalone assessments.
Which is such an awesome move.
Right. Before we always had to be part of a, the comprehensive assessment. And now, so that students don't get forgot about in between those 3-year cycles, sometimes it's really hard for a district to, see the benefit in having those resources in between what they've already done. That now the state legislature has directed DAPE and nobody else. This was something that we have unique to any other special ed service in Minnesota. We can do standalone services where we can get a student into service, because that's the whole point of special ed. You bring a student in as quickly and only as far as you need to help support them be successful, and with the entire goal that you're going to get them out into a more typical setting as quickly and successfully as possible. So that is, and then from that assessment, we document a present level of performance, which drives then a needs statement. Where are the students' needs at? And from those needs, then we look at in special ed goals and objectives. But really, the way I've been looking at it and talking about it for a lot of years is goals and objectives are really just like standards and benchmarks. So we have physical education through Shape America, through Minnesota now. In 2018 was the last time we have our revision of our state standards. They look very, very similar to the national standards at that time with the 5. We're in between review cycles, so we'll probably be using those in Minnesota for another couple of years. But that to me is the most exciting. One of the things that's really excited me is having standards and thinking about that in the terms of how we serve kids who qualify in special education. Is it gives us a kind of a checks and balances too. Are we keeping pace with what a student needs, not just having fun and being the class that everybody likes to come to? We really have to have some ownership of helping those students grow too. And I think that's what standards and benchmarks do better than any other thing. There's been over the years some really great curriculums, and people have really done some wonderful jobs with that. But it really goes back to standards. Where are typical students at, and what do we need to do to help our students work towards those goals?
Right. And you know, when I first came in, I just remember some of my professors talking about, like, when you're going through your eval, it's about figuring out what needs to be fixed, and you need to fix it. And it's really not like that. Like, it's so much more into, like, what is the general physical education? What are they learning? What are the standards, benchmarks? What are they learning? And how can you write their IEP and their goal in a way that will help meet the needs, so that they will be supported moving into the least restrictive environment with those standard-based IEPs. And I feel like that has been such a big shift in, like, where I have written my stuff from, and I still sometimes struggle with it because it's really a shift. If you haven't learned about the medical model of disability and the environmental, and the medical model and the environment social model, that's where I'm going. Medical model, social model. It's the difference between fixing what's broken, and that's what, when we're trying to get kids without using standard-based IEPs, that's kind of what you're looking at. Whereas the environment, and it's the environment doing the disabling rather than the kid being, broken, which is what it used to be. So I think this is a really great way to look at it.
And I think too, so many of our students have these characteristics that are kind of related to their, not that we're trying to just make these broad statements, but certain students that we see who aren't independently successful in physical education, it's not all about their motor or physical needs. It's about all those other kinds of things that make, and national standards now, it's standard 4, but Minnesota standards still 4 and 5, where it's being part of a team, it's follow rules and look at a lifetime healthy active lifestyle. There's just so many things in those last 2 standards that we need to be part of. And so that once you determine where those needs and you write those goals and objectives, it's up to us to go back to our building teams and say, here's the kind of service delivery. Is it more of a direct service, or somewhere on that continuum all the way to indirect? And people need to remember that it's about, you determine those with LRE and free appropriate public education, but it really is about where those needs are, and that's why it's so important.
Back to the kid.
Exactly. It's not putting them into a program or another
class.
Our students don't need any more labels. That they just don't need that. We need to think about them as individual students.
Yeah. And speaking of individuals, let's talk about our smallest individual students. What does federal law say about meeting the needs of pre-K students?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of folks out there across the country that fight this battle too, and in Minnesota, we keep getting pushback, and it's all centered around, because a lot of times early childhood programs do not have general ed PE, that powers that be in the districts don't think that we need to offer adapted PE, and that's not what federal rule says. And the folks at the National Consortium had a clarification letter that's so positive, and it's about if a student qualifies for those special ed services, no matter if there's a gen ed or not, they need to receive those services. it doesn't mean that a district has to offer general ed PE, but it does mean they have to offer adapted PE. If a student qualifies, those needs need to be met through those services. So.
Right. I'm going to be doing an early childhood podcast later this summer with, I don't know if you know Heidi Ambrosius from California. She does early childhood, and I'm going to have Dr. Allie Bryan, who's researched the early childhood adapted PE. And so I am super excited to like get into that later, because I'm not an early childhood person, but it is like something that I think needs to be chatted about and shared about, and just kind of the data that I had to research for my master's program, just like I'm excited to talk about it. But also, like, on the opposite end of the spectrum, what about like transition students? So that's 18 to 21, same thing?
Yeah. And it's the same thing. It's the same clarification. Even though in those transition, those after a student has graduated from their high school setting, and they move into those transition, typically 18 through their 22nd year. Yes, there is no physical education, but if a student still qualifies, a district in Minnesota and federal rule should be providing those services to meet those needs that qualify a student for those services. And that's where it gets to me. Sometimes decisions are made by age and grouping, and that's where sometimes that aging out term comes in, and it's not true. They need to process out. Yes, you can be exited from services, but that's because you've met the needs. Your present level, you're on a good track to have a fully active, independent activity level as you get older into your adult life, and that's what we need to
important.
People, yeah,
so important. So getting into another kind of big myth that everybody across the country is like, well, what do we do about this? What would you say about someone who's worried that their staffing and caseload numbers aren't adequate? How would you address that?
Yeah, I remember the year that I was named National Toy, and I think one of the first workshops I did was in Michigan, and one of the sessions I did was on smaller group activities, and somebody made a great well, Rich, I have 75 kids or 80 kids on my caseload. How am I supposed to spend enough time to really develop what those needs for those students can be? And it's the same thing here in Minnesota. We don't have maximum numbers on our caseloads in adapted PE. It is to be determined by your district team. It's really sometimes becomes more of a work to rule part of the deal with in your district, your union presence, because it really isn't. There isn't a rule or a law that limits our student loads. I think that's a better word than caseloads. Caseloads, it's so languagey based, but caseload to me kind of refers to some of those related services, where student load is, we're adapted PE teachers, and it's kind of sad, but that's the rules we play under here in Minnesota.
Right. And it's so hard because no matter where you go, like different districts have different, things that they go by, or if you're like traveling, or, if you're an itinerant where you're going like 7 different, like it's going to be different. So,
and let alone the time that it takes for all of your due process, your paperwork to really be part of that student's team. I always liked my challenge when I had a student that was in my student load. I wanted to be the student or the teacher on that team that knew that student as good or better than all of my peers on my team. So that
true.
When we came to an IEP, or when we came to a report out for an assessment, and whoever was leading the meeting, whether it be the case manager or some district level person, and they, after my data, and the person would say, do you have any more questions for Mr. Burke? And they all, no, we're good. We've talked on the phone. We really feel like he knows who our student is. And that to me was I could
biggest compliment ever. Boom, mic drop.
At that point, you try not to act like you're too full of yourself,
Yeah.
And that goes for due process stuff too. I always wanted to be the person on my team that knew what Minnesota rule and what the process was supposed to look like better than anybody else on my team. So
yeah, and I feel like I always want to be better, and so when I don't know the answer, I know somebody who does, and it's going to be Rich, or it's going to be the Min-Day committee. But I think that's why we work so well together. Whoever has a question about anything, we can always find the answer to, because we're really well connected, and that's just what works so well for us.
Absolutely.
But again, so going back to the due process, and I feel like so often DAPE teachers, adapted PE teachers, are left out of those meetings, and we talked about how we are part of that IEP team. And I know, like, when I go present, I don't know how you feel about this, but I want to, number one, know when that meeting is. I want to have my data ready, and just have everybody understand, we are part of that team. So how is that, when someone says, I don't know if I'm part of this team, or there's that myth out there, what would you say to someone who says that?
Well, I think it's really about another one that goes back to communication, here in Minnesota, and it's best practice in a lot of states where I've talked to other folks. There is a due process file for every student that includes, when their initial assessment was, when their next 3-year comes up, when their IEP dates are due. In this day and age, it's just not very hard to keep track of those things. I could see back in the paper pencil days that, copies would get misplaced, and, if you had a good learner studies secretary, or if you had a team lead who was really good at keeping track of those dates, once in a while they get missed, and inevitably you'd come into a building and somebody would be walking right directly to you, going, we did it, Rich. We forgot you. And we got this assessment that's due. Okay, when? Well, tomorrow. And oh my goodness. And that, I think, used to happen a lot more. I think electronic files and IEPs being on, like student plans and other things here in Minnesota, I think it's easier for that not to happen, but it still happens. Yeah. And so I think that's where just being part of that building team in my districts and pushed in Minnesota, we've really talked about motor teams. Okay, so we have an adapted PE teacher, we have related services of OTs, PTs, we have our related services of a nursing representative, we have somebody from a special ed leadership role in the district, those kinds of things, and having that network of people that you meet together. It could be semi-annually, it can be quarterly, it could be monthly, whatever your district will support. But that way you have one more person at least on a building team that can kind of keep an eye out for each other. Just like I can keep an eye out. This really sounds like we should be doing this kind of fine motor assessment, or this kind of, assessment for mobility within the building. And I can help, if that PT is not there, I kind of know some of the things that they might use. And so it's time for me to say, have you gotten a hold of this person yet? Same thing. I hope they do that for me. And that really does help. So I would hope that because it is about teams in Minnesota.
We're all about teams.
Districts are required to have these teams, and each building is required to identify who every person in that. And when we are talking about low incidence disability, especially, Holy moly. Then, you don't maybe see that person in your building.
Right.
And so it does. It kind of goes right over your head, and it just can't be that way.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just thinking now, because we're going to get into a little bit about in Minnesota, we have Unified Physical Education and a partnership with Special Olympics Minnesota, and it's really just working for our state. We have teachers that are very committed to it, and we have such a great partnership with that. Can you just explain in your career from the time that you started teaching, what has this partnership, as you observed, impacted Minnesota? Like, how is it impacted?
I think it's been a journey. I think Special O in my lifetime has been around since the 70s, and they do a lot. I remember the first things that I ever used from that were created by Special O were these task analyzed steps on how you might teach a student with certain kinds of disabilities or certain kind of learner attributes, how to pick up these skills, or how would you backwards chain so that you made it easy enough so that it was something they could do, so that they got a part of a skill so that you could build on later on. So that was way back when. It was a really good, not only for adapted PE, but for PE in general. It looked at the steps that we needed to take. But then 15, 20 years ago, it really came into play. Special O had the sight and the forward thinking to talk about unified, and having those unified programs. And the thing that here in Minnesota happened is that they came with some support. It wasn't just like, okay, here it is, you got to put this in and you got to run with it. I think they showed people how they could support you, and that with information and demonstrations, how to get people interested from gen ed and special ed. And again, way back when our logo for Minnesota DAPE was a tennis shoe with two laces, and one of them was gen ed PE and the other one was adapted PE. And it's, how do we make that not? How do we make that connection? And I that's the thing that I like about Unified and Special O coming in to be part of our big picture. Is it really is about giving opportunities for connections to our peers and other students and staff in the building that, it's like opened a lot of eyes, and anything we can do for that, I'm all for it. Sometimes it's hard to think about what it was before, and it's not the be all end all for all of our students, because some of our students are just not in those areas. But boy, oh boy, what a great honor that Special O has stepped up and helped. I just can't even imagine. I'd love to see somebody do some numbers about how many lives it's impacted. It's just, and I know your story is about unified soccer, and I think about how that opportunity for those students, and how wide-eyed, bright-eyed, it was like, whoa. And being able to coach that was like one of the highlights of your life so far too, I think, right?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing about Special Olympics Minnesota and doing Unified, like, it not only impacts the person with the intellectual disability, but it also impacts the coaches or anyone who has worked with the program. I mean, even tomorrow we have tryouts for like I said, I'm head coaching the MLS Unified soccer tournament or soccer team, and it's just really exciting. We get to travel to Portland and play in their stadium, and then we come home and have a home game and play in Allianz Field right after the Minnesota Loons, and it's just such a cool thing. I could go on and on, but I just think in the state of Minnesota right now, I feel like, yes, it's not for all students, but has it impacted so many people's lives for the better?
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about. Absolutely. And we have so many people on the leadership committee that have taken and run with us. And again, it's just been another absolute share. Nobody's trying to hang, well, we did this, and no, I'm not going to tell you how we did it. You figure it out on your own. No, that's just not been the way it is. It's so
Yeah.
collegial and so collaborative that kind of thing just makes my heart so happy and so full. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and speaking of sports, Minnesota has this amazing Minnesota State High School League. Can you share a little bit about what that, how that has been developed and what it kind of looks like in Minnesota?
yeah, it's been, in Minnesota, we have 3 divisions now. We have a division for students who have cognitive impairments. We have a division for students who have physical impairments, and we have a division for kids who have autism spectrum disorders. And so we have bowling, we have Minnesota, you would think it's Minnesota. We have floor hockey, and then we have indoor soccer, and we have indoor softball. So those are, and then the bowling now has just really taken off. And so we are giving students to have an experience within their own schools that would have never been possible. Students have a chance to be on a competitive team, and they have a chance to earn a varsity letter, and they have a chance to, represent their school out in other areas of Minnesota. And it's been something in Minnesota that there were a few really forward-thinking folks back in the 80s again, late 70s, early 80s, that kind of got together on a small group, and the Minnesota State Leadership Committee was part of that group, and talked about, hey, what can we do to make this happen? And it really started with kids with physical impairments, and then the next thing we added was kids with cognitive impairments, and then about 15 years ago we added kids with autism spectrum disorders, and trying to figure out what sports really work well with not only the team aspect, but some of the individual needs that they, as students, might have to be successful. So that's where the bowling comes in with the, bowling, yes, is a team sport, but it's really kind of individually based. And so some of our kids with those processing kinds of needs, they can do that because they're in there, they're doing their thing for their team. So
I love bowling. Bowling is just it's good for everybody. It's a lifetime sport. Like,
absolutely.
It's just so good.
And the nice thing, it allows people, students and outstate Minnesota that maybe have lower numbers and don't have enough to field a team in these team sports. They might not even have a bowling alley in that city, but they can go to a city somewhere close, and they can bowl and record scores, and even do an electronic meet where they're gonna do their thing and compare scores with another team, and that's how they figure out how that duel or whatever smaller tournament worked. And so then if they get enough of those scores, they can actually qualify for the state tournament, which in Minnesota is just huge.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Like, they get a chance, the Minnesota State High School League, not only for general ed students to participate in this state tournament like any other state, but our kids with intellectual disabilities or ASD or whatever their classification is, they're able to compete for a state tournament title.
Absolutely.
So great. So, all right. And speaking of just MnDAPE, right, we're going to get into our last little section of the podcast here. And here we go. Rich, tell us, because you're coaching the committee, I believe, for the 50th annual MnDAPE conference. Tell us about what's happening.
Yeah, there are 4 of us this year, because typically it's 2 or maybe 3 co-chairs for our annual state conference. This one, like Jen said, is the 50th annual. So we really wanted to make sure that we were going to offer something that was special to everyone, not just us in Minnesota. And so first of all, our theme for this year, 50 years of inclusion, innovation, and impact. And so I'm excited. I think my co-chairs, Mike Doyle and Heidi Fisher and Kay Oling and myself, We're just working on the other thing that we're trying to do, because it's 50, is we're going to figure out a way to loop in some of our retirees who had a big impact or were just part of this whole thing, so that we can celebrate in a big way. So we
I love that.
don't really have that nailed down yet, but I guarantee you it's not going to be because we don't put the effort in to make it happen. So we always have our state conference the last Thursday and Friday of September. We have a really good partner in True Friends and Camp Friendship, which is by Annandale, Minnesota. And it's on a beautiful lake setting. Jen has mentioned we do a campfire on Thursday night. We have all of our meals together at camp. We have cabins, so that it's just a really good time to get together and have a chance to share and network with people who are doing the same job that you're doing. And so it's a real opportunity to network and share and grow.
It's so good. I know, like, people who have flown in from all over the country to come to MnDAPE, the Teachers of the Year from the different districts, National Teachers of the Year. We have always such a good lineup of presenters, and they always say when they come to MnDAPE, it is like it feels like home. Like MnDAPE, even for us who go there every year, like every time we go, it's like, oh man, it's like we're home. We're talking to our people. We're getting to be better teachers, and we're learning so much. But the people who fly in from out of state, they will always say, man, this is just such a good conference. And so we're so excited to see what you bring us for the 50th MnDAPE conference.
If you can't get excited for a 50th of anything, especially right? The Minnesota DAPE conference, you just, you got to be a hard case, because this is exciting no matter, what your opinions are on the deal. So
right. It's so good. So again, Rich is co-chairing that with a few other of our MnDAPE friends. And so I'm going to let Rich pop out of the main stage area of our broadcast. So Rich, thank you so much for coming on and just talking through some of the things that are kind of myths out there, and kind of just what we call like busting the myths of adapted PE.
There you go.
But just kind of bringing some clarity, and especially with like the pre-K and the transition, there's just so many things that we got to talk about. So I just really appreciate you coming and talking about that. So I'm going to let you go. So just hang in the green room there. So hang on one second. Thanks, Rich. All right. So with that, I always love kind of wrapping up the podcast with some takeaways from today. And I think the biggest thing is that we're standing on the shoulders of the people before us who have set us up to have a better time supporting our students, doing better at our jobs, people who have fought some fights that we don't have to fight, just so that we can all be better, and we do better connected. When we know better, we do better. And just some of the things that Rich talked about, we're not on an island. We are part of a team. We write our goals, and sometimes you do need to go back and talk to your special education coordinator, director about some of those questions. And sometimes we do have to advocate for what the law says for our students and for our profession. And so I'm just really appreciative of all that Rich has said. My fellow National Adapted PE Teacher of the Year from Shape NOLA, I was Shape NOLA. He was AFERD. And so we've got some years between us, but the common place where we received our award. So that was kind of cool. So Rich has always been such a coach and a mentor to me, and I'm a better teacher because of him. And I know that he's a better teacher because of the people that were in his life. And so again, to be able to continue that forward with new and incoming teachers is going to be so important. So those are my takeaways from today. Introducing our next guest coming in June. This is Dr. Megan Johnson. And when I asked her for a headshot when we were doing our Shape Baltimore presentations, she sent me this because in Minnesota at the time it was negative 40 degrees. So you will see her live and in person on this broadcast, not in hats, because today in Minnesota it was almost 80 degrees. So it's good times. So thanks again to Rich Burke. Thanks to our listeners. And again, Dr. Bryden Carlson Giving for creating this amazing logo. Just like makes my heart so happy every time I look at it. And again, thank you to Fit and Fun Playscapes for being our sponsors for this podcast year. We love Playscapes, Fit and Fun Playscapes. And again, these are all the places that you can find us. We're on X, we're on Blue Sky, or you can just send us an email through Gmail. And again, you can watch on Heartbeats of Adapted PE podcast on YouTube, on the Health and Physical Education Collective, and currently on the Shape America YouTube page as well. So 3 places to watch. Again, we're going to drop this episode on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but there's always episode 1 that you can catch there if you missed that. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We have ended our podcast. Have an awesome, awesome week and month of May, everybody.